Hello everyone, welcome to Android. So today I'll be showing you guys how to get started on creating an Android app. So a little bit about me. My name is Willie. I'm a fourth year CS student at Waterloo. I'm currently working at Tesla and I actually just started my first day today. So I've done a lot of software engineering in my past. I've done full stack development, web development, mobile development, but most of all, I really enjoy Android development. It's where I started. And I worked on some pretty big apps, the most notable of which is the Wish shopping app. So this is a native Android application that I worked on a few years ago at a co-op term, and I learned a ton about how to create Android apps, and I hope to introduce you to some of my knowledge. If you have any questions, please go into the Slido, which should be linked within the hop-in. Here's my Discord, and I'll be answering questions after this within the Discord channel. So for today, I'll introduce myself and how I got started with Android, and why you should really learn about the Android platform, and why I think this might create a really good project for your Hack the North. And then I'll discuss how Android structures the code and how we define the app structure for an Android application. Then I'll discuss how to actually design the screen layouts, how to arrange all the buttons and the text views, and how to create those beautiful UIs. Then we'll actually make those screens do something. We'll create a simple app that has a button that when you click it, it will open up another screen. And it's pretty simple, but for an intro to Android tutorial, I feel like this will take up most of the time. Then I'll move on to discussing some design considerations. What language should you use when you're coding an Android app? And also, should you even pursue native Android development in the first place? There are some great options that allow you to code both iOS and Android at the same time without having to maintain separate code bases. Hopefully there'll be some time at the end for a Q&A. So a bit about me and how I got started with Android. As I mentioned earlier, Android development was actually the first serious software development that I've actually done. So before university, I realized, oh crap, I need to do co-op. I need some work experience before I start applying to jobs. So I decided to contact a small startup within Waterloo through some personal connections who is developing a Cycle application. So there I was helping to reach feature parity with the iOS version, which is already released. Within university, I released WattHub. So this is a side project that I work on for students to find useful info about Waterloo. So just like when restaurants are open, when classrooms are available, that kind of thing. And this experience really helped me gain an offer to the Wish Android team. So this was just before COVID, where I joined the Android team doing full stack mobile development. So there I was working on a variety of features, including coupons and also free gifts. So Wish really taught me a lot about how to work on a huge Android application used by millions of users. And I hope to share some of this knowledge with you today. So why did I get started with Android? Well, there are so many reasons. I'll mostly compare and contrast with iOS because that's the other big platform. First of all, I just found it so much more easier to get started with Android. First of all, when you code an Android app, you can either use Java or Kotlin. These are languages that are very common in the workplace. If you go to any big bank, for example, like RBC for co-op, or even like in school, you might have learned Java before. So because Android uses these common languages, you don't really have to learn something new. And the skills that you learn in Android development, such as all the quirks of Java or Kotlin with encapsulation and the other object-oriented programming principles, you can apply them elsewhere. Whereas with Objective-C and Swift, these are more niche and they're used mainly in iOS development. So you definitely get more you definitely have more opportunities to use Java in the future. Also, I don't have a Mac, so I was really unable to develop for iOS. I was a university student, we don't have much money, so I couldn't afford a MacBook, so I had to stick with Windows. This meant that my only choice was to do Android development. This Android Studio is really nice in that you can run it on any platform. So hopefully you followed the instructions of the hack pack and you've installed Android Studio and perhaps cloned the repo, but you can develop on any platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, you name it. Also, it's super easy to send an APK. I won't show you how to do this, but if you go into a specific folder, you can basically send one file for anyone, anywhere to run. You send it via email, messenger, whatever. They can just download it, install it on their Android phone, and they can just run it. Super easy. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I have published an Android application. It's on the Google Play Store, and it only cost me $25 one time. Whereas if I was to publish on Apple's App Store, I have to pay $99 every year. So for a small side project that I just want to release once, well, it wasn't really worth it for me to publish on iOS. It would cost me $100 every year, so I didn't think it was worth it. So now let's get into how to actually create an Android application. So hopefully you guys have Android Studio running. You can either use an emulator or plug in a physical device to be able to ready to run. If you have any questions, ask them in the Slido, and hopefully my workshop helper, Paul, might be able to help you debug. And also, you can either start a new project or clone the repository linked in the Hackpack. So either is fine. The Hackpack does have some extra configs that might make it a bit easier, but both should be fine as well. So let's actually get started. So at a high level, we need to do three things. We need to define the structure of the application. We need to define what the app looks like. And we also need to actually write code to move the actual UI elements around and make the app actually work. So these are defined with, so the first is defined within manifest and Gradle files. The second is in XML files, which are kind of like HTML if you worked with that before. And finally, we'll be actually writing some code in Java and Kotlin. It's really nice how Android Studio will create the basic framework of this application. It's kind of like React. It'll generate the main structure, and then you can add files within the folders that are created. So this makes it super easy to get started. So how will Android know the structure of my application? Well, first of all, a very important file is the manifest file. So this is responsible for telling Android very critical information about what the application actually does and what it actually needs. So for example, if you need specific permissions or features that are on the Android device, such as the camera or accessing context, well, you put it in here. If you look at the image here, you can see how at the top, this app requires the permission for the camera. So if you don't have that there, then your app won't be able to access important features of the device. You can also see that we're giving the application permission to vibrate the device. So this is another thing that you might want to consider if you're developing an app that requires specific device features. You also notice that we defined the actual application name here and also the app icon. So this is critical information if you just want to create an application, but usually you don't play around in this file too much. The main thing that you do is when you add new activities. So activities go in here, and you may notice the intent filter. We will discuss this later. But activities are a very important principle that you need to know when you're developing Android applications. Moving on, we also need to talk about Gradle files. So Gradle is what actually builds Android. It is used for package management, and we need two Gradle files. So if you go into Android Studio, I'll do this in a bit, you'll see how there are two build.gradle files. There's the top level Gradle file. So this will impact all submodules. We only have one submodule right now, which is the Android application. But if you do want to create other modules, such as some really complex Java code that you might need within your app, then you can use this top level Gradle file to be able to define various configurations. The most important Gradle file is the app module Gradle file. So this is where you include all the additional dependencies, and you also set version codes names here and also build types, such as if you're building to debug or release. So if you see here in the dependencies list, we can see all the important other modules that this app needs. So you can see that this app needs JUnit, which is a popular testing framework. It also uses a recycler view, which is a view used for rendering a list of elements. and you can also, and then you can define how to build the application here. So setting the version number is also done within this file. So if I just exit out of here, I'll show you guys where all this stuff is. So if you look at my Android Studio, you can see how Android Manifest is located in the manifests folder. So here, all of this stuff is is just auto-generated. I didn't change anything. The app name is just an intro application. The app icon is just the default. But if you do want to change stuff, you can see that you can see where to modify it here. I can see that if there's any questions, there might be a slight issue, but I'll just continue on. Here are the two build.gradle files. So this is the project level. So as you can see, there's not much in here that you really need to change, but in the module level, this is where you might need to configure your app. So here I've set some SDK versions, and most importantly, this is something that I added. It means that we're allowing the feature of view binding. This is something that I'll discuss later, but it just makes coding the application a lot easier. And here I've defined a bunch of dependencies that we'll need. So for example, a constraint layout and other various like core Android libraries. So now let's discuss how to actually create these screens. So obviously you want your app to actually look nice. Well, how do we define them? Well, layouts are defined within XML files. So these are kind of like HTML in that you have tags, and then you have kind of this tree of elements. And Android Studio will display how the XML files are will be rendered within the actual app itself. So it definitely helps with seeing the application, seeing how the application will look before you actually run the application itself. I do tend to just edit the XML directly because it gives you a lot more control. However, building and running does take some time, especially for bigger apps. So I do suggest using the design and blueprint view just to make sure you didn't mess something up, such as, oh, you want a horizontal list of menu buttons at the bottom, but you accidentally put it at the top, or you accidentally have it as a vertical list rather than horizontal, for example. So now I've talked a lot about views, but what actually are they? So if you know anything about Java and inheritance, well, all of these views, such as a text view or a list view, these all inherit from a view, the view class. So these are UI components that are displayed. Some views are layouts, like a linear layout, which will organize the views together. So a linear layout is pretty self-evident. It arranges all of the children in a single line. There's some other ones, such as relative layouts. Well, what does that do? Well, it arranges views relative to each other. And to actually edit a view, you change its attributes. So this is kind of like editing the CSS if you've ever worked with web development. And that's how you actually modify the actual appearance of a view itself. So I'm going to go back to Android Studio and let's play around with the editor. Oh, I see a question. Is there a one-time fee for one app, or can you publish multiple apps in the $25? It gets cut off. Yes. So you only need to pay once to get that developer account. That $25 is just to get the account itself, and then with that account, you can publish as many apps as you want. So this means that it's very easy to publish apps because it definitely just lowers the cost very, very significantly compared to iOS. So here within the res folder, this is where we define the layout files. So if I open up activity main, you can see it auto-generated a constraint layout that contains a single text view. So my recommendation is that you can look into how a constraint layout works, but if you want to create something quickly, then I just recommend using a linear layout because it is a bit simpler to use. Not to scare you away from a constraint layout, but it is slightly more complicated. Oh, I see another question in Slido. Should we only write the program with Android Studio? From Nielsen. I would recommend that, yes. I don't really see a need for you to write the application using any other IDEs. Sometimes I do just go into Notepad quickly if you don't want to open up Android Studio. It's not open yet. It does take a while for Android Studio to run. It's like a subject of many programming memes. But yes, Android Studio is fully contained, and you should be able to write your entire app within Android Studio itself. So now that we have a linear layout, let's add a button. So we can either add a button in the editor, or we can go into the design. So if you go into the design, you can see how we have two views here. So on the left, this is the design view. And on the right, this is the blueprint view. These are very similar. There's only a few slight differences, but these are just rendering what is actually in the XML itself. So for example, if I drag a button into the design view, it should just populate a button. And we can see that the code gets added automatically. So you can see how in the code view, we have a button that has been added automatically for us. These buttons are obviously used to click things. We will discuss how to actually define the click behavior of a button later on. But for now, I'll just demonstrate how to actually change the appearance. So suppose we want to have a horizontal list of buttons. Well, we already have that. But if we want to change its orientation, then we need to change the attributes of the linear layout. So going back to the code, the specific attribute is called orientation. And you can see how it gives me two options. By default, it is horizontal, but let's change it to vertical to see what happens. So if we go into the design, you can see how we now have a vertical list of buttons. And we can also change various other attributes as well. For example, this text, let's change we can change its background color to say, or I'll just use teal. I guess that's the default color. So here we can see that the background is now teal. Notice how it's very useful to actually just view the application without running it. Like I could run it, but it will take some time to build. I guess this is the perfect time for me to just introduce the other parts of the Android Studio development, the Android Studio Ide. So this is the build tab. You can see its status right here. There's also various other useful things such as Git. There's Git functionality in here, and if you ever want to see the full completed application, there's a branch called Full Solution. So Full Solution should give you the final state of the application once this workshop is done. Yeah, so this happens sometimes. You just have to close it, or you just wait. And you can see how this application in the emulator matches up with the design. Yeah, these two views, these are very similar. The only difference that I know is if you set the invisibility, set a view to invisible, it will show up in one but not the other. So if we go into the code and I set this to invisible, the visibility, then yeah, so it shows up on the right but not the left. And as always, in my hack pack, I've linked a bunch of helpful documentation sites. These are the official Android documentation guides. So if you have any questions about how to change this attribute, or how to make the text look like this, how to change the font, how to change the margin, what is padding, what's the difference? Well, if you go into the official Android documentation, well, it will tell you how to do it. It's basically a long list of what each attribute does and how changing it will modify the app. And this is a really good resource. And just searching on Stack Overflow will work as well. Now, going back to the presentation. Now, we want to actually add some code to get the button to actually do something. So this will be in Java and or Kotlin. So first of all, we need to discuss what is an activity. So if you go into the Java code or the Kotlin code, you can see that there should be a class called main activity. Well, this is a screen of the application. If you want to ever do Android development, or if you're applying for a co-op job that is an Android engineer position, well, you need to understand what the activity lifecycle is. So this is the process by which activities are created and destroyed, and how we can create new ones. So in this diagram here, we can see when an activity is launched, we call the onCreate method. Going to Android Studio, we open up this Kotlin file, and you can see how we have overridden this function from the activity class. So this is where knowing about Java or Kotlin and learning about inheritance and function overriding is very important. So we've overridden the onCreate method, and this is where we set the actual layout, which XML file we use. And then onStart gets called, onResume, and then the activity actually starts running. If other things happen, other activities want to appear, well, then onPause gets called, then onStop. And you can see how there's many loops that occur if various things happen. And most of the time, you don't need to override these methods. Because the default implementation is sufficient, but sometimes you do. For example, you might want to override a method, the onStop method, if you have a service that's running in the background. Perhaps you're downloading something that's very big. You don't want to actually stop the app from running. Well, if the activity is no longer visible and the application is about to close, well, you might want to stop that service. Otherwise, you might have a memory leak, and this will increase the memory usage of the application and greatly slow it down. I would highly recommend you learn more about the activity lifecycle because this is something that I've been asked in multiple interviews. So whenever you attend an Android interview, they might ask you this question about, hey, can you just explain how the activity lifecycle works? What do you do within the onCreate method? And this might definitely help you land a few co-op jobs. Now, how do we connect the XML and the Java code itself? Well, we use IDs. So IDs are something that I actually didn't add in the XML yet, but I will need to. So each view, you should add a unique identifier to each of them. So that way your application will know which view it's trying to modify. So each view will have functions and fields that you can use to modify them. You can add on-click listeners, you can modify the text, you can basically change anything within the XML with code itself. And if you want to create some events, handle events, well, you use Lambda functions in Kotlin. Java, you also can use Lambda functions, or you can create anonymous classes. Here, this is where there's a bit of difference, but it is pretty similar. So now I'm going to try to change some attributes of our text view, and then we will make the button actually do something when we click on it. I'll demonstrate how the activity lifecycle works briefly by opening up a second activity that we'll navigate to when we actually press this button. And I'll move on to Android Studio. If there are any questions, yeah, please ask them in SlideUp. So to start off, I'll show you guys how to define an ID. So this is just another attribute, and it starts off really strange with an ampersand and plus ID slash. It will automatically generate this for you, and just let it autocomplete by pressing tab. So I'll just call this text, and I'll set this. Oh, and this button already has an ID called button. Side note: Android Studio will highlight warnings. So here we have a warning that tells us we should set this 0dp. I'll just get rid of it by changing its wrap content. This isn't a huge deal, but this is actually a more interesting warning. So this is because Android wants us to add all strings within a specific file, and it is in the strings.xml file. So all strings of the application should go in here. The reason for this is translation or internationalization. So if you have an app that is used in multiple languages, well, you want to be able to translate your application very easily. You want to be able to send a list of strings to a translator, and they should be able to translate all of the text in one go. So if you have the text interspersed within all the XML files, then it is hard for someone to actually locate where all the text strings are. So if I just follow the instructions, it says to extract the strings resource. So I'll go ahead and do that. And you can see how it has appeared in here. So we can do this as well for Hello World. I'm not exactly sure why it isn't prompting us for this, but perhaps it's just because it knows it's a default string, so it won't ask us to modify it. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to create a second activity. So a lot of Android development will involve some copy pasting. So because this is very simple, I'll just create a second activity that is basically just like the first one with a simple layout and the text view in the middle. I see a question. Is it a good idea to have the same sort of mindset when building an app like how we build a website? I see some similarities between them here. I'm new to both. In general, yes, I'd say so. I'd say that all front-end development is very user-centric. So you should always think about how would I use the application? How would I like this application to look? How do I want it to feel? So in that sense, it is very similar. You want your user interface to be intuitive. For example, if you have a button that's disabled, well, let's gray it out. So we let the user know that clicking the button won't do anything. And that's where the similarities exist, right? There are a lot of common things that we don't even think about, right? Like a grayed out button, that is something that we just intuitively know is a disabled button. So therefore, doing mobile and web development can be very similar. Hopefully I've answered your question, if that's the mindset that we're both referring to. So I'll just add in some default text here. I'll just neglect putting this in the strings.xml file because this is a starter application. For your Hack the North project, you can just put all your strings directly, hard-coded, and there's not a huge risk of doing so, of not moving it. But I will give it an ID because we will need to access this in the future. So if I go into my Kotlin code, I'm going to show you guys the new way of accessing IDs, accessing views, and this is something called view binding. So view binding makes it a lot easier for you to actually access these views without having to copy and paste a lot of boilerplate code. So a lot of this is stuff that you don't really need to memorize. You just copy paste the code. But using view binding, we need to initialize a variable called activity of the type activity main view binding. Oops. Getting my Java and Kotlin syntax a bit mixed up. And this late init just means we will initialize it later. So we need to inflate the layout. And we need to set the content view to the root of this binding. So this code that I've written is equivalent to the code that I just deleted. It doesn't actually change anything, but this is the new way of doing things as far as I know. Oh, I see a question in the chat from Nielsen. Should I learn Kotlin even though I'm already completely familiar with Java? I'll cover this topic later. And why do we use binding? Well, this allows us to easily access the views within this main activity. So if we want to access a view, this is simply a field within the binding object. So this binding object has a field called button, and this button corresponds to the view with this ID. So if this button is this button here. And as mentioned earlier, we can set its attributes. So specifically here, we're going to set the onClick listener. And what are we going to do? Well, we want to start a new activity, the second activity. But before we do that, we need to create an activity, a new activity file. So I'm going to copy and paste all of this. If you're wondering how these binding files get generated, well, the file names are generated based on the XML file names. So it changes the underscores and removes them and changes it to camel case. So if I change this to activity third, then it will automatically generate an activity third binding. And obviously this binding does not have a button, but it does have a second text view. And we will be able to modify this text here by setting the text attributes. You can see if you scroll down how there's so many different attributes you can change. You can change the text size, you can change a bunch of other things. But for now, we're just going to set this to something that we'll do later. And once again, it is warning us that we should use Android resources which is in strings.xml. So how do we open a new activity? Well, this is where intents come in. So we create a new intent to start a new activity. And we set the actual class that we intend to open. So here I've initialized an intent class to open up the second activity. And we want to, let's say we want to pass in some information between these two activities. Say you have one activity that is the login screen, and you want to pass the username to another screen. Well, to do this, we can pass in strings or integers or other serialized data. And we pass these in key value pairs. So this is from, just pass in from main activity. And we can access this value within this file using this key. To actually start the activity, well, there's the function called start activity, and we call it with the intent. Now in this activity, how do we get the string? Well, here we need to get some extra data. Well, helpfully, the function is actually just called get data, get extra. And we need to use the same key here so we know which data we actually receive. And oh, I almost forgot. Whenever we add a new activity, we need to add this in the Android manifest. So this is, once again, just copy and paste. So if I run this application, clicking the button should open up the second activity. Yeah, sometimes the Android emulator will just not respond. So we do need to sometimes just wait. It is currently building. And when it finishes building, we should be able to see the updated version of the application. I see a question from Suyog. Is intent what we want to do in the activity? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but intent is just a specific. It's the name of a class. It is the name of a class that we use. It is the class that we use to define what activity we want to start. The intent also allows us to pass information between activities. So if I click this button, it should display. I'm not sure if you can see this. It is a bit small. That we have successfully passed in the string from the other application. This is because of our use of intents. And you can see that this is a very simple application, and a lot of the code is copy-paste. For example, all of this binding stuff, all of this overriding of the onCreate method, this is stuff that you can just copy and paste from this tutorial, or you can actually copy and paste from just other starter applications. So going back to the presentation. So a bit of a question for you guys. So I know that I haven't really discussed this, but in the Android manifest, you notice that there's an intent filter. Can anyone guess what happens if I make this change? So I change this intent filter to be within second activity rather than main activity. I'm just going to start a poll. So we have several options. Either there might be a compilation error, the app will build, but it will crash. The main activity will launch. The second activity will launch and say second activity, or the second activity launches but doesn't say second activity. So these are kind of like your different options. I see someone has voted for option number 4. I'll just wait a couple of seconds. So if you remember why I chose second activity, it's because this is the default text that we have here. And notice how when we ran the application, it didn't show up second activity because we passed in that info from the main activity. So actually, let's just try this out. Let's see what actually happens. So let's copy and paste this into here and rerun the application. Yeah, so looking at the new app, it actually doesn't display anything. So what should happen is it just opens up the second activity. Oh, yeah. So I assume it doesn't display anything because when we set the text, it doesn't see any string with that is passed in with the key value of key. So therefore, it's just an empty string. This is because we didn't open this activity from another one. We didn't open second activity from main activity. So there is actually no text that actually gets displayed. This just kind of overwrites the second activity string that is displayed here. So actually nothing gets displayed to the user. So the correct answer was number 5. No string gets displayed. Now, someone asked, should I learn Kotlin even though I'm completely familiar with Java? Well, here are some things to think about. Well, if you want to do Android development, I would highly recommend you do learn Kotlin. It isn't something you necessarily need to learn over the course of many weeks. It is something that you can just Google along the way. Because Android now officially supports Kotlin, and in fact, it is the official language for Android. Java is also supported, but it is a secondary language nowadays. And there's many reasons you might want to use Kotlin. One of the most important reasons is null safety. So in Kotlin, you are able to define which variables are nullable or not. So theoretically, you should never have a null pointer exception. And whereas in Java, you will get a null pointer exception basically very frequently. Some people call the null pointer exception like $1 billion mistake because it just happens so frequently within apps, and it is very hard to actually debug and to identify before you run the app, before testing, which variables need to actually have a null check. Another reason why you should learn Kotlin is because it allows you to write much shorter and cleaner code. There's many great features such as type inference and data classes that allow you to condense a really long Java class into a very short Kotlin class. So this means that your code is a lot more readable. You have a lot less copy paste, a lot less boilerplate. So this means that your code is cleaner. It's much more easy to read, and overall, it just provides a much better developer experience. However, there are also many advantages of Java, as Nielsen was mentioned. Like he or she is already familiar with Java, and this is probably because schools teach Java. It's very popular to be taught in high school or university, and also many big companies like banks or other established institutions, they will use Java in enterprise for the enterprise applications. And also, I've just also found that there's just more resources and examples on Stack Overflow. If you Google, hey, how do I do this in Android? Most often, the result that comes up will be in Java. Gradually, I'm sure this will change over time as more and more developers change over to Kotlin for its many advantages, because it is a much more modern language. But for a Hack the North project, I'd recommend maybe just stick with Java if you're familiar with it. That way, you can always learn Kotlin later on, but you don't have to learn the quirks of a whole other language within a very short time span. And at Wish, what we did was all the old files would be written in Java. However, any new files that we created would be in Kotlin. Therefore, we would get the best of both worlds. We wouldn't have to rewrite, thousands upon thousands of lines of code, which would obviously introduce more errors. However, any new files would be written in Kotlin, so we'd get the advantages there. And a great thing about Kotlin is that you can use both within the same application. So this means that you don't need to change out old files while creating new files in Kotlin, and will be completely fine. Now, I've talked a lot about native Android development. So this refers to Android development that can only run on Android. Well, what if you want it to run on iOS? Almost half the phones in the world run on iOS. So there are many other options for this, including Ionic, React Native, and other ones. And these are called hybrid apps. And there's many examples of both. So some hybrid apps include Instagram and Uber, and some native apps include like WhatsApp and Spotify. So you should definitely consider hybrid app development if you want to release to both markets. So what are the advantages of each? Well, as I mentioned earlier, for hybrid development allows you to run on both Android and iOS while maintaining a single code base. So this means it's obviously much faster to develop. You write once and you can run anywhere as the slow goes. And there's also many advantages to having choice. As I mentioned earlier, there are many, many different hybrid app frameworks. And you can kind of pick and choose the advantages of each one. If there are some aspects that you like about one but not the other, then choose the one that fits the requirements of your application the most. That's not to say that there are no advantages of native, right? Some companies do choose to write two different apps, one for iOS and one for Android. And the reason for this is that native Android development allows you to access the key features of the Android operating system. It gives you much more functionality, and it allows you to have more flexibility in how you code your app. So know that, for example, Pokemon Go, that is an app that is written natively. And I believe a big reason for this is because of its use of AR, of augmented reality. So using a hybrid model would not suit the needs as well. Also, because you're writing a native Android app, this means that you will probably be able to provide a better user experience. Some hybrid app platforms rely on web technologies. So this means that your mobile app will kind of look like a web app. This obviously means that the application will be a lot slower when you scroll, Instagram within Safari on your device. I'm pretty sure not many people do it. It's obviously a much worse experience than if you go in the app itself. So this means that you should be careful if you're just using a web app, using web technologies to develop natively. And as mentioned earlier, you should also consider native Android development because you do get better performance. Native Android apps tend to be faster. So going back, which one of these hybrid development platforms have I used before, and which one would I recommend? Well, I would actually recommend React Native. This is something that I used at a previous co-op called Spatial. So they're a pretty small startup, and they didn't have the engineering capabilities to be able to support engineers working on two different code bases. So what they decided was to use React Native to be able to use some of the existing React code for their web app in their mobile app as well. And if you've attended the React tutorial earlier today, well, you will learn a lot about how React works, and you can directly apply those principles to React Native. There are so many similarities. All the React lifecycle things, all the idea of creating components, functional components or class components, the use effect class, all of these principles that you learn within that React workshop, you can apply this to React Native as well. So this means that learning how to use React Native gives you very good bang for your buck. You get to learn web and mobile development at the same time. And plus, this is in JavaScript or TypeScript, which means that you can easily pick it up. JavaScript is pretty common, and it's something you want to learn if you ever want to do web development. And as a front-end engineer like myself, working with JavaScript is something that I'm very familiar with. So using React Native definitely is something that I would definitely recommend. But also native Android development is something you should definitely consider as well if you're just more familiar with it, or if you want something that is written specifically for Android itself. If I look at the questions, what makes hybrid apps less performant? So this is a tricky question because it really depends on the actual platform itself. But a big one reason is that some hybrid platforms basically just run a browser in the background. So this browser obviously isn't optimized for running the actual app itself. So this means that all the optimizations that are in the APK that when you compile it get put in, these are not available. Optimizing apps isn't something that I've had a lot of familiarity with, but when you code an app for the operating system, you can create a faster app because the app is able to use features of the operating system that aren't available to, say, a browser. So as mentioned earlier, I've linked a bunch of resources in the hack pack, resources to the Android API packages, or just how to develop Android, how to use Android Studio. I also didn't really discuss material design. So this is suggestions by Google for how to create an Android app that looks like an Android app. Some good principles that you should follow if you want to make your app look very nice. Zane asked, so they're like Electron? Yes. So some hybrid app platforms are like Electron. Yes. Which I believe relies on web, which is which uses browser technologies. So that concludes my workshop. I'd like to thank a lot of people for helping me put this together. First of all, Bobby Wang. He was the presenter for this workshop last year. So using the materials that he created definitely helped me create this workshop. And I really appreciate being able to for him to be able to open source all of this on GitHub. Thank you very much to Hongyi Chen and Rachel Xu for taking me through the setup process for this workshop, and also Lauren Yoshida, who's currently in the background running the logistics behind all of these presentations. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Slido, and also please leave feedback as well. The Slido should be linked within Hopin, and I'd greatly appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. Okay, reading the questions. I see, when installing the Android Studio, which version of Android should I install for my emulator? Honestly, I would suggest just the latest version of Android. I know that some later versions of Android have better development features. So for example, in Android 9, I believe they added profiling for how much memory you're using. So this definitely was very helpful when working on my side project. because there was like this memory issue, which like the memory like heap, the memory used in the heap would just skyrocket at some point. So I think using those tools definitely helped me debug that error. So yeah, I would just suggest using the latest version of Android. If there's no more questions, I guess I'll conclude the workshop here. Thank you for listening to this workshop, and I'll be on the Discord answering questions. Thank you very much.